The Black Widow was sold at auction for $3. The cowboy recognized the cross around her neck. Zeke Thornfield pushed through the gathered crowd, dust swirling around his worn boots. The September sun beat down on Perdition Creek's main street where townspeople had assembled for the monthly auction. Livestock, farm equipment, and human labor contracts all went to the highest bidder. The woman on the wooden platform stood with her chin raised. Her dark skin gleamed with perspiration, but she held herself with quiet dignity despite the circumstances. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he tried to drum up interest in her labor contract. "Do I hear $2 for this here woman's services? She can cook, clean, and tend to household duties. Contract runs for 1 year to settle outstanding debts." A merchant near the front spat tobacco juice into the dirt. $2. Zeke barely heard the bidding. His eyes had fixed on something. That made his chest tighten. Around the woman's neck hung a silver cross, its surface catching the afternoon light. The engravings were unmistakable. Delicate vines wrapped around the edges, and at the center, barely visible from his distance, would be the inscription he knew by heart. "For my beloved Rebecca. May God watch over you always." His sister's cross. The one she wore every day until the night she died 5 years ago. The blood drained from Zeke's face. His hands began to shake. Rebecca had been wearing that cross when they found her body in the creek outside the Whitmore Ranch. The sheriff claimed it had been washed away by the current, never to be recovered. Yet here it was, around the neck of a woman being sold like cattle. $2.50, called out a voice from the back. The woman's eyes swept across the crowd. For a moment, her gaze met Zeke's. Something flickered there. Recognition? Fear? He couldn't tell, but she looked away quickly. Whispers began to circulate through the gathering. Zeke caught fragments of conversation from those nearby. "That's her, ain't it? The Black Widow they've been talking about. Heard she poisoned 3 husbands. All rich men, too. Sheriff in the next county put out word. There's money on her head." Zeke's mind raced. The woman was wanted for murder. Yet she wore his dead sister's most precious possession. How had she come by it? Had she killed Rebecca for it? Or was there something else? Something that connected this stranger to the unsolved mystery of his sister's death? The auctioneer looked bored. Going once for $2.50, Zeke felt the weight of every eye in the crowd. His conscience warred with his desperate need for answers. Buying another human being's labor contract went against everything he believed in. But if he didn't act now, she might disappear forever. With her would go any chance of learning what really happened to Rebecca. The woman on the platform stood perfectly still. She didn't plead or show fear. Her composure was unsettling, as if she had been expecting this moment. $3. Zeke's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd before he realized he had spoken. Every head turned toward him. The woman's eyes found his again, and this time he saw something different. Not surprise, but a kind of weary acceptance. The auctioneer's face brightened at the prospect of a real bid. $3 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear $3.50? The crowd fell silent. $3 was more than most were willing to spend on a woman with such a dark reputation. The merchant who had bid earlier shook his head and walked away. Others followed his lead, going once for $3. Going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air. Sold to the cowboy for $3. Zeke's heart hammered as he made his way forward. He pulled crumpled bills from his pocket and handed them to the auctioneer. The man counted them quickly and nodded. "She's your responsibility now, mister. Contract says 1 year, but given her circumstances, I'd watch my back if I were you." The woman descended from the platform with measured steps. She stood before Zeke, her expression unreadable. Up close, he could see the cross more clearly. It was definitely Rebecca's. The silver had tarnished slightly, but the engravings were exactly as he remembered. "You got a name?" Zeke asked quietly. "Delilah Morning." Her voice was soft but steady. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed by the lack of drama. As people drifted away, Zeke noticed 3 men on horseback watching from across the street. They wore the hard look of bounty hunters, and their attention was fixed on Delilah. She followed his gaze, and her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We should go," she said. Zeke nodded toward his horse. "Can you ride?" "Well enough." They walked toward the edge of town, Zeke leading his mount while Delilah walked beside him. The bounty hunters made no move to follow, but Zeke could feel their eyes tracking every step. When they reached the outskirts of Perdition Creek, Zeke helped Delilah mount behind him. As she settled onto the horse, the cross shifted against her throat. The inscription was now clearly visible. His sister's name stared back at him from the silver surface. "That cross," Zeke said without turning around. "Where did you get it?" Delilah's hands gripped his shoulders as the horse began to move. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words hit him like a physical blow. "Your sister gave it to me before she died. If you want the truth about what happened to Rebecca Thornfield, we need to get far away from here." The horse carried them into the desert as dust devils danced across the horizon. Behind them, the 3 bounty hunters finally spurred their mounts forward, beginning a pursuit that would lead all of them toward a reckoning 5 years in the making. The wind carried dust and secrets across the barren landscape. Zeke's horse picked its way through scattered rocks while the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of copper and bone. Behind them, 3 dark shapes moved against the horizon. Delilah's grip on his shoulders had loosened, but she remained silent. The weight of her words about Rebecca hung between them like heat shimmer. Every hoofbeat carried them further from civilization and deeper into questions that had haunted Zeke for 5 years. When they reached a cluster of weathered boulders, Zeke dismounted and helped Delilah down. The rocks would provide shelter from prying eyes and the merciless sun. He tethered his horse in the shade and turned to face the woman who claimed to know his sister's final moments. "Start talking," he said. Delilah touched the cross at her throat. Her fingers traced the familiar engravings with reverence. "I worked at the Whitmore Ranch, kitchen duties mostly. Your sister was the governess." "There." Zeke's jaw tightened. The Whitmore Ranch was where they'd found Rebecca's body. The official story was that she'd fallen into the creek during a night walk. Accidental drowning, the sheriff had ruled. Case closed. "Rebecca was different from the other folks who worked there," Delilah continued. "She asked questions. Noticed things that didn't add up." "What kind of things?" "Money going missing, invoices that didn't match the books, workers disappearing without their pay." Delilah's voice carried the weight of old fear. She started writing it all down, keeping records. The desert wind picked up, whistling through the rock formations. Zeke stared at the horizon where the bounty hunters had vanished behind a ridge. They would catch up soon enough. "The night she died," Delilah said, "Rebecca came to the kitchen. She was scared. Said she'd found something that would bring down Cornelius Whitmore and his whole operation." Zeke's hands clenched into fists. What did she find? Evidence that Whitmore was stealing from his investors, framing innocent people for the thefts. She had names, dates, amounts. Everything needed to send him to prison. Then why didn't she take it to the sheriff? Delilah's laugh held no humor. Because Sheriff Mason was in on it. Half the town was getting paid to look the other way. The pieces began to form a picture in Zeke's mind. His sister hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered to keep her quiet. The thought made his chest burn with rage, but he forced himself to stay calm. "She gave you the cross that night?" "For safekeeping. Said if anything happened to her, I should find her brother. Said you'd recognize it and know she was telling the truth." Delilah's eyes met his. She was planning to confront Whitmore the next morning. Demand he confess or she'd expose everything. But she never made it to that confrontation. No, they found her in the creek at dawn. Zeke turned away, his vision blurring with unshed tears. Rebecca had died trying to do the right thing. She'd been brave and foolish and noble, everything he'd always loved about her. And he'd spent 5 years believing it was just a tragic accident. "Why didn't you come find me sooner?" he asked. Delilah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Because I was scared. And because I had my own plan for justice." "What kind of plan?" "The kind that got me called. The Black Widow." The sound of hoofbeats echoed off the rocks. 3 riders appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the burning sky. They sat their horses with the patient stillness of predators. "Those men aren't lawmen," Delilah said. "They work for Whitmore." Zeke's hand moved to his gun, but Delilah caught his wrist. Her touch was gentle but firm. "They want us alive. Dead people can't answer questions." The lead rider called down to them. His voice carried the lazy confidence of a man who held all the cards. "Delilah Morning, been looking for you." "Silas Creek," she replied. "Still doing Whitmore's dirty work, I see." Creek laughed. "Man pays well for results. You caused him a lot of trouble, widow woman." "Haven't caused him near enough." Zeke studied the 3 men above them. They were positioned to cut off any escape route, but they made no move to descend. Creek seemed more interested in talking than shooting. "You got something that belongs to Mr. Whitmore," Creek said. "Some papers that went missing from his office. I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Same papers that got that governess girl killed. Rebecca something or other." Zeke's blood turned to ice. Creek had just admitted to being involved in Rebecca's murder. The casual way he said it, as if her life had meant nothing, made Zeke's finger tighten on his gun. "Easy, boy," Creek called down, noticing the movement. "No need for unpleasantness." Yet, Delilah stepped forward, putting herself between Zeke and the men above. "What does Whitmore want?" "Those papers. And some answers about what happened to his business partners." "Which business partners?" Creek's grin was visible even at a distance. "The 3 rich men who married you. Funny how they all ended up dead." The wind died suddenly, leaving the desert in oppressive silence. Zeke felt the weight of Creek's words. 3 husbands, all dead. The Black Widow reputation wasn't just idle gossip. "Natural causes," Delilah said. "All of them, sure they were. Heart attacks, accidents, suicide. Real convenient for you, inheriting all that money." Zeke's mind raced. Delilah had married 3 men connected to Whitmore's operation. 3 men who had died under suspicious circumstances. The woman standing beside him wasn't just a witness to his sister's murder. She was something else entirely. "We'll be back come morning," Creek called. "Think about what you want to tell Mr. Whitmore. He's got questions, and he's not patient with folks who don't answer." The 3 riders disappeared beyond the ridge, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Zeke turned to face Delilah, seeing her clearly for the first time. 3 husbands, he said. "All dead," she nodded. "All part of Whitmore's network. All guilty of crimes that would have sent them to the gallows." "Did you kill them?" Delilah's hand found the cross again. Her fingers worried the silver surface while she considered her answer. "That depends on how you define killing." The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes began their evening song. Zeke realized he was alone in the wilderness with a woman who might be a murderer, hunted by men who definitely were. "I think," he said slowly, "you better tell me the whole story." Delilah sat down on a flat rock and looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "The whole story might take all night. We've got time. Your sister started something when she began investigating Whitmore. After they killed her, I decided to finish it." She paused, her eyes reflecting starlight. But I had to be smart about it. A woman in my position couldn't just march up to the sheriff with accusations. So you married into the conspiracy 3 times. Each marriage gave me access to records, bank accounts, business dealings. Each husband thought he was getting a convenient wife to legitimize his stolen wealth. And then they died. Delilah's smile was sharp as winter wind. And then they died, but not by my hand, Zeke Thornfield. By the hands of men they'd cheated, betrayed, and stolen from. I just made sure the right people learned the right information at the right time. The desert night wrapped around them like a shroud. In the distance, a fire flickered where Creek and his men had made camp. They were waiting for dawn, confident in their advantage. "Rebecca's evidence," Zeke said. "You still have it?" "Hidden where Whitmore will never find it. Along with everything I gathered from my 3 husbands." Delilah stood and brushed dust from her dress. "Enough to hang every man in that conspiracy, including the ones hunting us. Then why haven't you used it?" "Because I needed the right moment, the right leverage." She looked at him with eyes that held depths he was only beginning to understand. "And maybe I needed Rebecca's brother to help me finish what she started." Dawn broke over the abandoned Blackstone mine with the color of old blood. Zeke had slept poorly against the cold rock, haunted by dreams of Rebecca's face beneath dark water. Delilah sat motionless near the mine entrance, watching the horizon where Creek's campfire had burned through the night. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the morning stillness. Zeke grabbed his rifle and positioned himself behind a fallen timber. 3 riders emerged from the dawn mist, moving with the deliberate pace of men who knew their quarry had nowhere to run. "Morning, folks," Creek called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Hope you had time to think about our conversation." Delilah stood slowly, her hands visible but not raised. "We talked." "Good. Mr. Whitmore's waiting for those papers. And he's got questions about your husbands." Creek dismounted and walked closer, his gun hand resting casually on his holster. His companions remained mounted, forming a loose semicircle that blocked any escape route. "Tell me about Thomas Carver," Creek said. "Your first husband. Rich man, owned half the cattle in 3 counties. Married you in the spring, dead by winter. Heart attack, they said." Delilah's expression never changed. "He was an old man with a weak heart. Funny thing about that heart attack. Happened right after someone told his business rivals about the rustling operation he was running. All those cattle with altered brands made some powerful enemies real quick." Zeke felt his stomach tighten. He was beginning to understand Delilah's methods. "Then there was William Nash," Creek continued. "Banker from El Paso. Married you, what, 6 months after Carver died. Another heart attack. Poor man was so stressed about all those angry depositors who found out he'd been gambling with their money." "Men make their own choices," Delilah said quietly. "And Marcus Bell. That suicide was real convenient timing. Right after his stolen Army supply contracts got exposed to the wrong people." Creek was close enough now that Zeke could see the scar running down his left cheek. Close enough to count the bullets in his gun belt. Close enough to remember every word he'd said about Rebecca. 3 husbands, 3 convenient deaths, Creek said. "You're either the unluckiest woman alive or the smartest killer I ever met. I never killed anyone, maybe not with your own hands. But you sure know how to arrange accidents." The morning wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Zeke's finger found the trigger of his rifle. One shot would put Creek down, but his companions would return fire instantly. Not good odds in open ground. Creek seemed to read his thoughts. "Easy there, boy. No need for shooting, yet." He turned back to Delilah. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where those papers are hidden. Then you're going to come back to town with us so Mr. Whitmore can ask his questions proper. And if I refuse?" Creek's smile was cold as winter stone. "Then we start hurting people. starting with the boy there. Zeke tensed, ready to fight his way out, but Delilah raised a hand slightly. A warning gesture so subtle that Creek missed it entirely. "Those papers you want," she said. "They're not just Rebecca's evidence about the embezzlement." "What else?" "Records from all 3 of my marriages. Bank transactions, business correspondence, shipping manifests. Everything my husbands thought they were hiding." Creek's eyes narrowed. "What kind of records?" "The kind that prove Whitmore's been planning to eliminate his partners all along, including the men standing behind you." One of the mounted men shifted in his saddle. "What's she talking about, Creek?" "Nothing. She's trying to cause trouble." "Am I?" Delilah's voice carried across the canyon with quiet authority. "Tell them about the list, Creek. The one Whitmore keeps in his safe. The one with their names on it." Creek's hand moved toward his gun, but Delilah continued speaking. "Henry Morrison, Jake Sullivan, and you, Silas Creek, all marked for elimination once this job is finished." The man called Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. "Silas? Don't listen to her. She's lying." "Then why did Whitmore pay us half up front? Why does he want her alive instead of just putting a bullet in her head?" Morrison's voice carried a note of doubt. "Man's been acting strange lately, secretive." Delilah pressed her advantage. "Because he needs to know what evidence I have against him. And because once he gets those papers, you 3 become loose ends." "Shut up," Creek snarled, drawing his gun. But the damage was done. Seeds of doubt had been planted in ground already fertile with suspicion. Morrison and Sullivan exchanged glances, their hands drifting toward their weapons. "Think about it," Delilah said. 3 husbands, all eliminated after they outlived their usefulness. Whitmore's been cleaning house for years. You're just the next batch of problems to be solved. Creek raised his gun toward Delilah, but Morrison's voice stopped him. "Maybe we should hear what she has to say. She's playing us against each other. Is she? Or is she telling the truth about something we should have figured out ourselves?" The tension stretched thin as wire between the 3 men. Zeke could see the moment when partnership began to crumble into paranoia. These were men who lived by violence and betrayal. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, especially when their own lives might be at stake. Sullivan spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly from years of tobacco. "Remember what happened to the Morrison boys? Whitmore said they got careless, but they were good men. Careful men. They're gone because they made missteps," Creek insisted. "Or because they discovered too much." The desert morning was thick with quiet tension. 3 men who had once ridden as allies now watched each other with the guarded caution of rivals. Delilah observed the unraveling with unshaken calm. She had planned this moment just as she had managed the end of her 3 marriages. Not with force, but by sharing the right truth at the right time with the right person. "The papers are hidden in the old Spanish mission," she said at last, 20 miles north of here. "But you'll need all 3 of you to retrieve them. The spot requires more than 1 person to access." It wasn't true, but it sounded like it could be. More importantly, it forced the men to stay united despite their growing doubts. "We'll all go," Morrison said, his focus never drifting from Creek. "Fine." Creek returned his weapon to its place, but his motions were tense with frustration. "But if you're misleading us, lady, you'll wish you hadn't. I'm sure I will." As the group got ready to travel north with their captives, Zeke met Delilah's gaze. She gave him the faintest nod. Whatever her plan was, it wasn't done. The ones doing the chasing had become the ones being drawn in, though they didn't realize it. The small group set out toward the far-off mountains, where a forgotten Spanish mission rested in ruins. Behind them, the deserted mine faded into stillness again, keeping its own truths buried. The rising sun burned away the mist, revealing the harsh grace of the desert world. Somewhere ahead waited answers to mysteries that began with a governess asking too much, and across that had passed through hardship and lost to reach its resting place. The Spanish mission slumped against the mountainside like broken teeth. Its adobe walls gave way to time, worn down by decades of wind and neglect. Wooden crosses leaned in disrepair, telling stories of lost hopes and fading belief. Creek got off his horse first, scanning the remains with sharp caution. Morrison and Sullivan followed, but their focus was split half on danger, half on each other. Distrust had grown strong during the long journey north. Where? Creek asked. Delilah pointed to the fallen bell tower. Under the altar stone. There's a hollow where the priests once stored sacred things. Zeke looked around the mission. Thick walls gave shelter, but also blocked sight lines. Several paths led through the gaps in the broken structure. If trouble started, the ruins could quickly become a trap. Sullivan, stay with the captives, Creek directed. Morrison with me. Why don't I go instead? Sullivan's tone hinted at unease. Let Morrison keep watch. Because I said so. Maybe we should all go together, like she said. Creek turned to Sullivan. You challenging my lead? Just staying cautious. The desert breeze moved through the ruins, carrying the scent of sagebrush and long-forgotten places. Zeke sensed the tension tightening between the three men, delicate as glass. One misstep would break it completely. Fine, Creek said at last. We all go. But if this is some kind of setup, lady, you'll be the one who pays. They approached the altar together, boots crunching over scattered rock and shattered clay. The altar was a large granite block, still intact after all this time. Faint carvings marked its surface, softened by years of wind and rain. Help me shift this, Creek said to Morrison. The two positioned themselves on opposite ends of the stone. Sullivan kept his weapon up, his eyes bouncing between the others and the ruins. The stone moved with a harsh scrape like bones grinding. Beneath it was a hollow space filled with shadows and dust. Creek reached inside and pulled out a leather satchel, dry and cracked with age. This it? He asked Delilah. Open it and see. Creek loosened the ties and looked inside. His expression changed as he read the top sheet. These are shipping records from the Carver Ranch. Keep going. Creek removed more pages, his face tightening with each one. Sales slips for stolen livestock, payments sent out. Letters to buyers down south. Now you understand, Delilah said softly. Understand what? Why Thomas Carver couldn't be allowed to live. Zeke watched as realization crossed Creek's face. The first husband hadn't passed due to natural causes or stress. He had been removed because his actions threatened a bigger plan. This proves Carver was dealing stolen stock, Morrison said, reading over Creek's shoulder. But it doesn't say anything about us. Delilah's smile was sharp as broken. Glass, that's just the first satchel. Creek's head snapped up. What? Thomas Carver's records. William Nash had his own hiding place, as did Marcus Bell. 3 marriages, 3 sets of evidence, all documenting the same conspiracy from different angles. Where are the others? Hidden where only I can find them. Insurance, you might say. Creek's hands clenched the papers so tightly they began to tear. You've been playing us from the start. I've been playing everyone from the start. The question is whether you're smart enough to realize who your real enemy is. Sullivan lowered his rifle slightly. What do you mean? I mean, Cornelius Whitmore has been eliminating his partners for years. My 3 husbands were just the beginning. He's been cleaning house, removing anyone who could implicate him in the larger conspiracy. What larger conspiracy? Morrison asked. Delilah's eyes found Zeke's. In them, he saw the weight of 5 years' worth of secrets finally coming to light. Land fraud, government contracts, army supply theft, cattle rustling, bank embezzlement, murder. Her voice carried the cadence of someone reciting an inventory of sins. A network of corruption that stretches from here to the territorial capital. And you have proof of all this? 3 sets of records. 3 different perspectives on the same criminal enterprise. Enough evidence to hang every man involved. Creek's face had gone pale beneath his weathered tan. Including us. Especially you, Silas Creek, killer for hire. Responsible for at least 12 murders, including that of Rebecca Thornfield. The ruins fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through broken stones. Zeke's hand moved slowly toward his gun, but Creek was faster. "Don't," Creek warned, his weapon trained on Zeke's chest. "I've killed better men than you. Have you?" Zeke's voice was steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "Because you murdered an innocent woman in cold blood. That doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you a coward." Creek's finger tightened on the trigger, but Morrison stepped forward. "Wait." Morrison's voice cut through the tension. "If what she's saying is true, if Whitmore's been planning to eliminate us all along, then we need those records." "To do what?" "To protect ourselves, to have something to bargain with." Sullivan nodded slowly. "Morrison's right. We can't go back to Whitmore empty-handed, not knowing what we know now." Creek's gun wavered between targets. "You're letting her manipulate you. Am I? Or are you the one being manipulated?" Morrison's own weapon was now pointed at Creek. "How long have you been working for Whitmore? How many of his problems have you solved?" "That's my business. It's our business now. Because if she's right, we're all dead men walking." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the mission ruins. Zeke realized he was witnessing the complete breakdown of the hunting party. Delilah had turned predators into prey with nothing more than carefully placed words and buried truths. "The other records," Sullivan said to Delilah. "Where are they?" "Safe, hidden where Whitmore will never find them." "But you'll give them." "To us? That depends." "On what?" Delilah's hand moved to the cross at her throat. "On whether you're willing to help me finish what Rebecca Thornfield started." Creek laughed bitterly. "You want us to turn against Whitmore. I want you to choose sides, the winning side. And if we refuse, then you go back to Whitmore with nothing. You tell him you couldn't find the evidence. And you wait to see how long it takes him to decide you're more liability than asset." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. 3 killers faced with the possibility that they themselves had been marked for death. A woman who had orchestrated the downfall of 3 husbands, now offering them a chance at survival. "What do you want us to do?" Morrison asked finally. "Help me destroy the conspiracy that killed Rebecca, all of it. Everyone involved. That's suicide." "No," Delilah said quietly. "That's justice." The wind picked up, scattering dust and debris. Across the broken altar, somewhere in the ruins, a piece of rotted wood fell with a sound like a gunshot. The mission had been built for worship, but now it served as a crossroads where the living chose between honor and survival. Zeke watched the 3 men struggle with their decision. They were killers and thieves, but they were also human beings faced with their own mortality. The choice Delilah offered was simple in its complexity: betray the man who had betrayed them, or die as pawns in someone else's game. Creek was the first to lower his gun. The Whitmore Ranch sprawled across the valley floor like a diseased spider, its buildings connected by dirt paths that radiated from the main house. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney in the pre-dawn darkness, but the rest of the compound lay silent. Zeke crouched behind a water trough, studying the layout. 5 buildings total, the main house where Whitmore lived, the bunkhouse for ranch hands, stables, cookhouse, and a small office building where the ledgers were kept. Creek positioned himself near the corral fence, his rifle trained on the main house. The transformation in the man over the past 2 days had been remarkable. Learning that his employer planned to eliminate him had stripped away layers of false loyalty, revealing the cold pragmatist underneath. Morrison and Sullivan flanked the office building. Both men moved with the careful precision of professionals who understood that their lives depended on perfect execution. Trust remained fragile between them, but shared danger had forged a temporary alliance. Delilah emerged from the shadows near the cookhouse, carrying a leather satchel. She had retrieved the hidden records during the night, documents that would either save their lives or get them all killed. Her face was calm, but Zeke could see the tension in her shoulders. The plan was simple in concept, deadly in execution. They would present Whitmore with evidence of his conspiracy, but not to blackmail him. Instead, they would force him to confront the reality that his network was collapsing from within. Light appeared in the main house windows. Whitmore was an early riser, a habit that had served him well in building his criminal empire. But this morning, his routine would be interrupted by visitors he wasn't expecting. Zeke moved toward the front porch, his boots silent on the packed earth. The door was solid oak, reinforced with iron straps. A defensive measure that spoke to Whitmore's paranoia about his many enemies. Creek appeared at the corner of the building, his signal clear. Everyone was in position. Zeke knocked 3 times. Footsteps approached from within, heavy and cautious. The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, silver-haired and well-dressed, despite the early hour. Cornelius Whitmore had the soft look of someone who paid others to do his violence. "Mr. Thornfield," Whitmore said, his voice carefully neutral. "Unexpected pleasure. We need to talk." Whitmore's eyes shifted past Zeke, noting the other figures positioned around his compound. His hand moved toward his waistcoat, where he likely kept a derringer. "I wouldn't," Creek called from the shadows. "We're all friends here." Whitmore's face went pale as he recognized his former employee's voice. "Silas, you were supposed to bring me the woman. Change of plans, boss." Delilah stepped into the lamplight spilling from the doorway. The leather satchel hung from her shoulder, its weight suggesting substantial contents. "Mrs. Morning," Whitmore said, "you've caused me considerable trouble, not as much as you've caused others." Whitmore stepped back, allowing them to enter. The main room was lavishly furnished, filled with expensive furniture and artwork that spoke to years of successful theft. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "What do you want?" Whitmore asked. Delilah placed the satchel on his mahogany desk. "To show you something." She opened the satchel and withdrew 3 thick bundles of documents. Each bundle was tied with ribbon and labeled with a name: Thomas Carver, William Nash, Marcus Bell. "Records from my 3 husbands," she said. "Everything they kept hidden. From their legitimate business partners, including their correspondence with you." Whitmore's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you think those prove. They prove you've been eliminating your partners for years. Cleaning house to protect yourself. That's ridiculous." Delilah untied the first bundle and spread documents across the desk. Shipping manifests for stolen cattle, payment vouchers for bribes, letters discussing the elimination of potential threats. "Thomas Carver was stealing cattle and selling them in Mexico," she said. "You provided the transportation network. When he became careless and attracted attention, you had him killed. Heart attack, natural causes. Brought on by the stress of having his crimes exposed to his enemies. Enemies you told about his activities." Whitmore's face had gone ashen. Zeke realized the man was seeing his own methods reflected back at him. Delilah had learned from the master, then improved upon his techniques. Creek moved closer, his rifle still trained on Whitmore. "Tell him about the list, boss." "The one with our names on it." "What list?" "The one in your safe. The one marking U.S. for elimination once this job was finished." Whitmore's eyes darted toward a painting on the far wall. Behind it, Zeke guessed, lay the safe Creek had mentioned. The man's face confirmed the accusation. "You were becoming liabilities," Whitmore said quietly. "All of you." Morrison stepped through the front door, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "So you planned to kill us. Business decision. Nothing personal." "Killing Rebecca Thornfield was personal," Zeke said. "She was trying to stop your crimes. She was interfering with my livelihood." The casual admission hit Zeke with physical force. 5 years of grief and rage focused into a single moment of perfect clarity. This man had ordered his sister's death over money, nothing more complicated than profit and loss. Delilah opened the second bundle of documents. William Nash was embezzling from his bank, using depositor funds to finance your operations. When federal investigators started asking questions, you eliminated him too. "Another heart attack," Whitmore said. "Convenient. Convenient for everyone except Nash and his depositors who lost their life savings." The third bundle contained Marcus Bell's records. Army supply contracts, stolen goods manifests, bribery payments to territorial officials. A web of corruption that stretched far beyond the valley. "This is impressive," Whitmore said, studying the documents. "But what do you plan to do with it?" "That depends on you." "How so?" Delilah's smile was sharp as winter wind. "You have two choices. Confess to your crimes publicly, or watch your empire destroy itself from within." "Explain." "Your surviving partners don't trust each other anymore. Too many people have died mysteriously. Too many prophets have disappeared. They're starting to ask questions about your methods." Whitmore's laugh held no humor. "You think you can turn them against each other? I think they're already turning. Sheriff Mason suspects you killed the Morrison boys. Bank President Hayes thinks you're skimming from the government contracts. Judge Crawford believes you're planning to eliminate him next. You've been busy. 5 years of careful preparation. 3 marriages that gave me access to records, bank accounts, and business correspondence. Everything needed to document your conspiracy." Whitmore walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames. His reflection danced in the polished andirons, distorted and wavering. "What's to stop me from killing all of you right now?" he asked. Creek raised his rifle. "Self-preservation." "Besides," Delilah said, "copies of all these documents are already in the hands of territorial authorities. If anything happens to U.S., they'll be delivered immediately." It was a bluff, but a believable one. Whitmore had survived this long by being cautious. The possibility of exposure would paralyze him just long enough for their plan to work. "You want me to confess?" he said. "I want you to tell the truth about what happened to Rebecca Thornfield, and Thomas Carver, and William Nash, and Marcus Bell, and all the others." The fire popped and crackled, filling the silence with the sound of consuming flame. Outside, dawn was breaking over the valley, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The reckoning that had begun 5 years ago with a governess asking too many questions was finally reaching its conclusion. Whitmore turned from the fireplace, his decision written on his face. 6 months later, spring rain drummed against the courthouse windows in the territorial capital. The trial had lasted 3 weeks, drawing spectators from across the territory. Cornelius Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, his expensive clothes unable to disguise the hollow look of a broken man. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Zeke stood in the back of the courtroom, watching. Justice finally delivered. The evidence Delilah had gathered over 5 years had proven overwhelming. The bank records, shipping manifests, correspondence between conspirators, a paper trail that led directly to murder. Sheriff Mason had been arrested 2 days after Whitmore's confession. Judge Crawford fled to Mexico but was captured at the border. Bank President Hayes took his own life rather than face trial. The conspiracy had collapsed like a house built on sand, each member's downfall hastening the next. Rebecca's murder was officially solved. The newspapers called it the crime of the decade, but to Zeke it was simply closure. His sister could finally rest. Delilah waited outside the courthouse, her face turned toward the gray sky. The spring. Rain fell steadily, washing dust from the streets and filling the air with the scent of new growth. She wore a simple blue dress instead of the mourning clothes that had earned her the Black Widow name. Grace, Zeke said, using her real name. Grace Delilah Freeman had been buried under layers of necessity and survival, but she was emerging. Again, she turned at his voice. The hardness that had defined her features for years had softened. Not weakness, but the relaxation that comes when constant vigilance is no longer required. "It's finished," she said. Yes. They walked together toward the edge of town, where their horses waited. The rain had turned the road to mud, but the air felt clean, purifying. "What will you do now?" Zeke asked. "Start over. Find a place where Grace Freeman can live without looking over her shoulder." And the Black Widow? Buried with the men who created her. Creek appeared from the shelter of a nearby building. The former gunman had testified against Whitmore in exchange for a reduced sentence. His cooperation had been invaluable, but his future remained uncertain. "Heard the verdict," he said. Zeke nodded. Life in prison. Better than he deserved. Justice isn't about what people deserve. It's about what's right. Creek studied Zeke's face. "You really believe that?" Rebecca did. She died believing it. The rain continued to fall, each drop carrying away another piece of the past. Creek pulled his hat lower and walked toward the saloon. His demons would take longer to quiet than legal proceedings could address. Morrison and Sullivan had disappeared after the trial began. Smart men who understood that reformed killers were still killers in the eyes of the law. They had taken their chances with new identities in distant territories. Grace mounted her horse, a mare she had purchased with money inherited from her 3 husbands. The irony wasn't lost on her that their criminal profits were funding her. "Fresh start. Where will you go?" Zeke asked. "North. Maybe Oregon. Somewhere the name morning means nothing." They rode together to the cemetery outside town. Rebecca's grave lay beneath an oak tree, marked by a simple headstone that bore her name and dates. The inscription read, "She asked the right questions." Grace dismounted and knelt beside the grave. From her saddlebag, she withdrew the silver cross that had started everything. The engravings caught the gray light, still beautiful despite their journey through darkness. "She gave this to me for safekeeping," Grace said. "I think it's time to give it back." She buried the cross beside the headstone, returning it to the sister who had worn it with such faith. The circle was complete. The debt was paid. Zeke knelt beside her, his hand touching the wet earth. "Thank you," he whispered, "for finishing what she started. Thank you for helping me remember who I used to be." They stood in the rain, 2 people who had found their way back to themselves through shared purpose. The silence between them held no awkwardness, only the peace that comes when justice finally wins. At the cemetery gate, they prepared to part ways. Grace would ride north toward Oregon and a new life. Zeke would return to his cattle ranch, where honest work waited under open skies. "Will I see you again?" he asked. "Probably not. Grace Freeman is going to live a very quiet life. She's earned it." Grace smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, Zeke saw genuine happiness in her eyes. Not the sharp satisfaction of revenge, but the deeper contentment of work completed and peace achieved. She rode north without looking back. Zeke watched until she disappeared around a bend in the road, then mounted his own horse and headed south. The rain had stopped, and sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Years later, he would sometimes wonder what became of Grace Freeman, whether she found the quiet life she sought, whether the woman who had been called the Black Widow ever truly escaped her past. But on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the grass, he would remember a silver cross buried beside his sister's grave. He would remember that justice sometimes comes not through violence or legal proceedings, but through the patient work of wounded people who refused to let evil triumph. Rebecca had asked the right questions. Grace had found the right answers. And somewhere in the space between question and answer, both women had discovered that the price of justice was worth paying, no matter how long the accounting took. The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight the dead could rest and the living could hope. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.